Good evening, everybody. I hope you've all had a good week. As always, thank you for being here and for taking the time to watch. Before we begin today's case, I just want to mention that this video discusses a real life story involving the illness and death of a child, which some viewers may find upsetting. I always try to approach these cases in a respectful and factual documentary style format, using publicly available information. If this topic isn't right for you today, please take care of yourself, and I hope to see you in the next video. For those choosing to continue, thank you for being here. In the early 2000s, a young mother began sharing the story of her son's health struggles online. Through social media and blog posts, she documented his illnesses, hospital visits, and the emotional toll it was taking on their lives. Friends, strangers, and online communities followed the updates closely, offering support and sympathy as the child's condition appeared to worsen. But over time, doctors began to notice something deeply troubling. Medical tests revealed levels in the child's body that should never have been possible under normal circumstances. What investigators would later uncover would lead to one of the most disturbing cases involving a parent and child in recent years. This is the story of Lacey Spears. Lacey Spears was born on October 16th, 1987, in Alabama, in the United States. She lived with her mom, dad, and her older brother and sister. Her mom and dad had poor health. Her mom was suffering from type 1 diabetes, and her dad had Crohn's and celiac disease. It is reported that Lacey had a difficult relationship with her parents growing up, and she used to argue a lot with her father, and her mother was described as being very cold. Lacey didn't get the attention she craved from her mom. Her mom was really unaffectionate because she wasn't getting attention from her parents. Lacey turned her attention to dolls. Lacey got as obsessed with dolls. When Lacey was about 4 or 5, her dream was to become a mom. One of Lacey's friends picked up and started to play with the dolls, and Lacey saw red. Lacey immediately started to strangle her friend. Eventually, Lacey did calm down and let her friend go. When the friend's parents picked her friend up, they noticed bruising around their daughter's neck. After this, Lacey's friend was never allowed around to Lacey's house again. As Lacey grew older, her obsession with dolls faded and started joining different school activities like softball team, the debate team, and the drama club. Overall, Lacey excelled in all these activities and was described as a teacher's pet. Some pupils that were in Lacey's class described Lacey as strange because she was a massive liar. This was to get attention. To get further attention, she told people that she suffered from anorexia and fell over, and that how she got her ankle brace. Over the years, Lacey would change her story so many times. At the age of 14, Lacey started telling people that she had fallen pregnant, but due to her lying all the time, people started questioning this and asking Lacey if she was really pregnant. After a couple of days of Lacey telling people she was pregnant, she came back into school and told everyone she had an abortion. However, when Lacey told her friends where she had an abortion, one of her friends said they don't do abortions there, and then Lacey changed where she went to cover up her lies. Before we continue, this is just what Lacey is telling her friends. I cannot confirm or deny whether she was pregnant at this time. The lies and attention carried on throughout her life, so we don't actually know what she's lying about. Lacey started to accuse family members of sexually abusing her and was telling people. Lacey ran away to one of her friend's house, and the friend's mom answered the door, and Lacey started telling her and that she was scared to go home. Lacey's friend's mom let her sleep at their house for a couple of weeks. The friend's mom did report this to the local authorities, and a case was opened for these allegations, but there were no evidence about sexual abuse happening. Lacey started calling every woman who would give her attention Mum. This made everyone feel uncomfortable. Lacey then got a job at the local church nursery to look after other people's children. Lacey started to form close attachments to these children. She was acting like she was their mom, and the mom would report Lacey and wouldn't want her looking after their children anymore. After high school, when Lacey was 18 years old, she moved out of the family's home into her own apartment that she shared with her sister and got a job in childcare. She worked at daycares and babysat for local families, often inserting herself into the lives of other people. She had a reputation for being nurturing and drawn to children. She of others, friends and acquaintances later recalled that Lacey seemed emotionally dependent on being needed, especially by children. Lacey would look after this one boy when she started telling the local community that this was her son. Even when the mother was with them, the boy started suffering with ear infections, but that seemed to only happen when Lacey was with him. This is important in today's case, so remember this part. Lacey stopped looking after the boy. When one weekend, Lacey just disappeared with the boy, and when it got to Sunday, the boy's mom was frantic and ringing Lacey on her phone, but she wasn't answering. The boy's mom went around to Lacey's house, but no answer. On Monday morning, Lacey did eventually turn up, and she never really gave an explanation, so the boy's mom banned Lacey from going near her son again. Lacey was heartbroken at this news. Lacey soon moved on and went on to look after another boy, 6 months old Jonathan. Jonathan's mom was 19 years old, and Lacey offered to look after Jonathan for free, and Jonathan's mom jumped at the chance of a free babysitter at weekends. Again, Lacey started to tell people that Jonathan was her own son. Lacey started calling Jonathan her little John John. Lacey did, however, take it further by posting photos of Jonathan on her MySpace account. She was getting attention from social media, and Lacey loved it. This is when Mummy Blogger was born. When Lacey took Jonathan home, he would have these mysterious ear infections. Lacey continued to babysit Jonathan for a while, and it was at this point that she didn't want to babysit other people's children anymore. She wanted a child of her own. Lacey meets a man called Blake, and he is a police officer. They go on a couple of dates, but that is the extent of the relationship, and they go their separate ways and never see each other again. They don't sleep with each other. Blake will come up again, so remember the name. Lacey then meets a man named Chris Hill, and he was a neighbor of Lacey, and they started seeing each other. All Lacey was interested in was sleeping with him to get pregnant, and it worked. Lacey told Chris that she was pregnant, and Chris that was amazing and that he was going to step up to be a good father. Chris wanted to get married and be a proper family. However, Lacey did not have the same ideas. And when Chris stated talking about marriage, Lacey said, "This isn't your baby, it's someone else's baby." And then Lacey cut Chris out of her life and never saw him again. On the 3rd of December, 2008, Lacey is 21 years old. She gives birth to a baby boy who she names Garnett. Garnett was born a very healthy boy. In the weeks after Garnett was born, Lacey was taking loads of photos. She was posting him all over social media. Lacey was absolutely loving all the attention that she was getting from posting her son. Only 2 days after he was born, Lacey rushed Garnett to the hospital and said there's something wrong with him, and that he had a fever and that there was something wrong with his ears. The doctors checked Garnett and ran loads of tests, but they couldn't find anything wrong with him, so they sent Lacey and Garnett home. The day after Christmas, Garnett is rushed into hospital because Lacey is claiming that something is wrong with him. The doctors run all of these tests, hook Garnett up to an IV. All Lacey seems to be bothered about is taking pictures and posting them on MySpace. This got Lacey loads of attention and sympathy because they thought Garnett was ill. In 2009, Lacey was at the hospital daily claiming that different things were wrong with Garnett, like he isn't eating properly. He's always vomiting everywhere. He's not keeping his food down. Always something wrong with his ears. His ears are bleeding. All this time, Lacey is documenting on MySpace with all of the photos. The doctors could never find out what is wrong with Garnett. They could see Garnett's ears were bleeding, and not why they were bleeding. Over time, Garnett underwent numerous medical tests and procedures, while doctors tried to determine the cause of his repeated illnesses. However, as Garnett grew older, some of the medical results doctors were seeing began to raise serious concerns. Because the doctors could find anything wrong with Garnett, this is when suspicious started to arise about Lacey and one of the doctors. Lacey saw did come up with her own theory. She thought Lacey was suffering from Munchausen by proxy. When the doctors approached Lacey about this, Lacey was not happy. Lacey would move around to different hospitals and doctors once they started to get suspicious. Lacey was able to find a doctor that agreed to operate on Garnett to try and stop Garnett from vomiting. This operation was carried out when Garnett was only a couple of months old. At 9 months old, Lacey was able to convince another doctor to perform another operation. This time it was to install a feeding tube into Garnett's stomach. This was because Lacey claimed that Garnett was still not eating. However, friends have later reported that they saw Garnett eat food, many times perfectly fine. Another friend said when she went around to Lacey's house, Garnett was eating, and Lacey smacked him and punished him for eating all of Garnett's life. He would be in and out of hospital, and Lacey would always be posting on social media. In 1 year, Garnett had 23 hospital stays for numerous different issues. Garnett did suffer with ear infections, and people did suspect that Lacey was causing these ear infections, but they couldn't prove it. In 2010, when Garnett was 2 years old, they moved to Florida to live with her grandmother, and it is believed that she moved because she had exalted every single doctor in her area. Whilst in Florida, Lacey's behavior started to get even more stranger. She started a blog of all Garnett's hospital visits and journey. She even posted about Garnett's father and that he had passed away. She even started saying that Garnett's father name is Blake, which I can't stress this enough is not true. Lacey joined a mums group that met on a regular basis, and she would tell the mums that she was desperate to have another child. She said she could find a man to have a child with, and then one of the mums offered up her own husband to impregnate Lacey. So Lacey started having sex with this woman's husband to try and get pregnant. This only happened a couple of times because the women decided that maybe it wasn't a great idea, so Lacey didn't get pregnant. As time went on, more people started to become really suspicious of Lacey because she was always lying or changing her story, even though Garnett isn't really ill. And when Lacey was talking about Garnett's symptoms, it just didn't make sense. Garnett was not displaying these symptoms. In 2012, Garnett was about 4 years old, and Lacey decided it's time to relocate again, and they moved to New York. They lived in a fellowship community where they would grow their own food, make their own clothes, make their own medicine, organic foods, and Lacey really threw herself into this lifestyle. Lacey believed that this lifestyle would cure all of Garnett's illnesses, and people in the community really expected to see a really ill child, but they saw him play around with other children, just being really happy, and they also saw him eating. Lacey continued to say Garnett was really ill, and all of his different symptoms, continuing to post on social media about all of his illnesses, going to the doctors, stating that Garnett is having seizures, and again, this whole time, the doctors could never find anything wrong with Garnett. And as Garnett was getting older, the doctors wanted to remove Garnett's feeding tube, telling Lacey that he doesn't need it, and we need to get it removed ASAP. Lacey refused and stated he needed that feeding tube. Then if a doctor persisted, Lacey would take Garnett to a different doctor. In January 2014, Lacey phoned one of her friends in a panic, stating that Garnett is having a seizure, and she needed to get to the hospital but didn't have a car. The friend got in her car and drove over to Lacey's address. When Lacey opened the door, her friend thought she would in a mess, but she calmly opened the front door and just packed Garnett's hospital bag. Her friend also notices that Garnett was hooked up to his feeding tube, and his feeding tube was hooked up to a bag of cloudy white milky liquid. They get in the car and rush to the hospital, but all Lacey cared about was taking photos for social media. When they arrived at hospital, Garnett was immediately checked over. The doctors can see that Garnett is shaking and seems to be something wrong with him. They clearly notice that Garnett wants to throw up, but he can't. The doctors also check his sodium levels, and his sodium levels were 140, which was normal. However, Lacey keeps insisting that something is wrong and that Garnett keeps having seizures. The doctor said there is nothing wrong with him, but just to make sure, they hooked him up to an EEG machine, but they still can't find anything wrong with him. Garnett stays in the hospital for a few days just to make sure that everything is all right. There was a camera in his room so the doctors can keep an eye on him and his behavior, and for further symptoms. Lacey is still posting constantly to social media, stating, "Pray for Garnett. He's in hospital. He's not doing too good." Eventually, the doctors discharges Garnett. Tragedy this is when things take a turn for the worse. Lacey is seen on the camera, taking Garnett to the bathroom, and when they return from the bathroom, Garnett is seriously ill. The doctors then rush in to help and figure out what is going on, and they check Garnett's sodium levels, and his sodium levels are now 182. One of the doctors even said that Garnett's sodium level is the highest he's ever seen. The doctors then realized that this could be fatal because with sodium levels that high, the brain begins to swell. Garnett was airlifted to another hospital. They worked frantically to try and get the sodium levels down safely and quickly as possible. Throughout all of this, Lacey is concerned with her social media. The doctors do eventually get Garnett's sodium levels down slightly. However, it was already too late, and 24 hours later, Garnett was pronounced brain dead. The doctors informed Lacey, and the doctors expected Lacey to completely fall apart and completely lose it. But that is not how she reacted. All Lacey was bothered about was going into Garnett's room and taking hundreds of pictures for social media. When Lacey left the hospital, she posted on social media stating, "Garnett the Great, journey onward today." Meanwhile, the doctors are trying to figure out how this happened because one moment his sodium levels were normal and then the next minute they were extremely high. The doctors are left with one conclusion, and that this was an intentional salt poisoning, and the doctors only had one suspect in mind, Lacey Spears. The doctors immediately phoned the police and they looked at Garnett's medical history and also Lacey's medical history. Some doctors believed that Lacey was suffering with Munchausen by proxy. The police searched Lacey's apartment and found containers of salt. Lacey wanted her friend to go to her apartment and get rid of the bag of cloudy white milky liquid. Lacey's friend thought that was weird, so instead of getting rid of it, Lacey's friend took that bag to the police. The police tested the liquid, and the liquid was a high sodium mixture. The police also looked at the video, where Garnett was completely fine, and then goes to the bathroom with his mom and returns and is not fine. The police found out that whilst Lacey was in the hospital, she was Googling things and definitely makes her look guilty. The trial took place in 2015 in Westchester County, New York. During the proceedings, prosecutors argued that Lacey Spears had deliberately given Garnett large quantities of salt, which led to dangerously high sodium levels in his body. Medical experts testified about the test results and explained that the sodium levels discovered in Garnett's blood were far beyond what would normally occur without an external source. The defense argued that the case was based largely on circumstantial evidence and maintained that there was no direct proof showing exactly how the sodium had entered Garnett's body. After hearing the evidence, the jury found Lacey Spears guilty of second-degree murder and first-degree manslaughter in March 2015. Later that year, she was sentenced to 20 years to life in prison. Since being convicted, Lacey still insists that she is innocent and did an interview with the 48 Hours show, which you can watch. Because of the nature of her conviction, Lacey will only become eligible for parole after serving the minimum portion of her sentence. Until then, she remains incarcerated. The case of Garnett Spears continues to be referenced in discussions surrounding child abuse investigations and cases where medical professionals must identify unusual or unexplained symptoms in young patients. For many people, the case remains a deeply tragic example of how warning signs in medical situations can eventually lead to criminal investigations. The case of Lacey Spears is one that continues to leave many people with unanswered questions. While the investigation and trial provided a legal conclusion, the circumstances surrounding Garnett's illness and the events leading up to his death remain deeply disturbing. At the center of this case was a young child whose life was tragically cut short. For many, it serves as a reminder of the importance of safeguarding, awareness, and the role that medical professionals play when something doesn't seem right. If there are any cases you would like to see explored in future videos, please feel free to leave a suggestion in the comments. Thank you for watching. And as always, stay safe out there.